Welcome to my channel. This is Code Pal, and for today's video I'm going to be teaching you about loops. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a file called loops.py, py being my extension, and then I'm going to follow that with opening that in VS Code. So I'm going to be showing you how to utilize loops. Loops are used in programming when you want to repeat an action multiple times. So let's do an example without loops. So let's say if you wanted to print numbers, one way of doing that would be I write a code and I say what I want to print. So I want to print 1, I want to print 2, I want to print 3, I want to print 4, I want to print 5. Then I'm going to head to my terminal and I'm going to call my path, which would be loops.py, and it's going to print all the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A major issue with this methodology is the number of lines. Let's say I wanted to print a lot more numbers. I'm going to have a lot of lines of code. This can be made simpler by using loops, where you can perform the same action but in fewer lines. I'm going to repeat the problem using loops. Loops utilize a circular logic. And one kind of loops that I'm going to be introducing are while loops. I'll first start with creating a variable called I, which I will set equal to 1. I'll then create my while loop where I'll set I less than 6. And within that, I'm going to define my parameters. So then, as long as I is less than 6, I'm going to print I. And then the second thing I'm going to do, I'm going to increase I by a value of 1. Another thing to note here is that whatever's within my while loop is called body. And I'll quickly add that note. And while loops are really interesting, or loops in general, because you can condense them within your programs. Let me explain this while loop one more time. So in this particular loop, as far as what the body is saying, is that as long as the condition that the I is less than 6 is met, I'm going to continue to loop. So first I'm going to feed in the value of I equals 1, and I'm going to print the value of 1. And then after that, my 1, which is my I, is going to have 1 added to it. And that's the node I just added. So for the first loop, the value is going to be 1. And then for the next loop, the value is going to be 2, and so on. So now I'm going to head to terminal and show you what happens. So when I run my file, I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 twice. So let me comment out my previous attempt, the previous method I was using, and I'm going to rerun this path and let's see what happens this time. Yes, so I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this is what should happen, because on my 6th turn, what's going to happen is 6 is not less than 6, because 6 is my I, it's not less than 6, so I'm going to get knocked out of the while loop. So now I'm going to explore another type of loops called infinite loops. For my example, I'm going to do a while loop where, if true, my program will keep on printing, I will keep printing. So this program is going to continue to run and run and run as long as this condition holds true. This program only has one output, which is true. This program is always true and will continue to print. I will keep printing. Let me show this in action. So I'm going to quickly comment out my previous work. Then I'm going to head to the terminal window and call my path. So you can notice, like, I will keep printing keeps on running until I abort this program. So I just interrupted my program execution. I'm going to now scroll up and see what exactly happened. If you notice, there are a lot of lines that got printed. And this is the classic example of what infinite loops look like. The lines don't change, but they keep printing the same thing again and again. And this is also an important reminder when you code in the future, and specifically with loops, because you want to be careful that you include a way out when you code. Your code otherwise will stay stuck in this loop. Now I'm going to explore another type of loops called for loops. For loops. Let me quickly comment out everything that I previously did. So I previously showed you an example of a while loop. Let's execute the same in a for loop. So I would write for I in range 1, 6. I will then print I. One thing to note here is how I specify my range for my I values. 1 will be the first value that gets printed, and 5, not 6, will be the last value that gets printed. And I'll show that to you once I head to the terminal window in just a minute. Both while and for loops do the same thing. One difference in the two is that for loops, the number of iterations is already known and is something that we set. In while loops, the command runs until a certain condition is proved to be false. And this is what we saw in our earlier example with I less than 6. We run it until our value of I is equal to 6, which is not less than 6. So that's why we fall out of the while loop. For loops are used when you have control over your conditions, while are used when you do not have control over your condition. When I head to the terminal window and I run this, we see exactly that happening. We see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 being generated because that's exactly what for loops do. For loops can also be performed over lists. And lists is something that I went over in our last conversation. So I'll start by creating a list that I'm going to call names, and I'm going to fill it with many names. Some of the names that I'm going to include in this list are Robert, John, Kyle, and Kelly. This particular list is very special. This particular list is a birthday name list, so it's birthday for all 4 of these individuals, and I want to make it special for them. I want to wish them happy birthday, and I want to make it individualistic for them. How do I do that? So what I want to do is I just don't want to wish them a happy birthday generically. I want to include their name. And how can I do this while utilizing for loops? So for my for loop logic, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write for name in names colon, and within that I'm going to use a variable called message, and I'm going to write happy birthday plus name. So I'm going to concatenate here 2 strings, happy birthday plus the name, and then I'm going to print my message. I head to terminal, and when I run my path, I'm going to get happy birthday with each of the names concatenated. So this is a really quick way for you to learn 2 things. 1, for loops with list, as well as concatenating strings. I'm going to quickly add the exclamation mark at the end of my happy birthday and comment out the things from earlier, and let's run it again. So now we get happy birthday Robert exclamation mark, happy birthday John exclamation mark, happy birthday Kyle exclamation mark, happy birthday Kelly exclamation mark. Before moving on, there's something else that I want you to take note of. Here the variable name represents one item in the list called names. And when I hover over the names, you'll notice that it's of type string. It tells me what kind of stuff is stored within my list. Now I'm going to show you how to do the same problem in an alternative manner. So I'm going to still use for loops here. So I'm going to say for I in range len of names. Here in my earlier problem, when I used range, I specified 1 through 6. If I don't do that, it's automatically assumed that I'm going to start with 0. What's interesting about this particular example is that while my result is going to be the exact same thing as I got in my last example, the logic is going to be completely different. So this logic is kind of similar to the example before the last one where I used range. And if I specify my range, that's good, but if I don't, it's automatically assumed that it starts at 0. So here I'm setting my range from 0 to the length of my list names. The second thing I'm going to do is add my message. So my message is going to be happy birthday, and I'm going to concatenate that with names of I. So this for loop is going to run through, and it's going to go through that list, and it's going to print for each individual, and I'll end that with exclamation mark, and I'm going to finally print that message. When I head to terminal and run this, what's going to be interesting is I'm going to get the exact same result twice. And this is what I was expecting. I was expecting to get happy birthday Robert come out twice, happy birthday John come out twice, happy birthday Kyle come out twice, happy birthday Kelly come out twice. And that's exactly what my code was doing. I just used a different logic to do it. So let's say I wanted to find out the index for each of the names in my list. I can use for loops for that. So what I would do is I would write for index, comma, name in names, colon, and within that I'll define my message. My message would equate to string of index plus name plus is in index. And what I'm doing here is similar to what I did previously, where I'm concatenating strings and information from my list, and I'm going to then follow that with printing this. And I'm going to use my print function to print this message. And when I'm going to head to terminal, I'll get a chance to print this, and the findings of mine will tell me what my index is for each of the names. But I get an error when I do that. The reason is because I haven't added a really important thing to my code yet, and that is enumerate. And when I need to know the actual value as well as the index, I need to add enumerate. So I'm going to add that right before the names in my first line. And now when I do this and I'm going to run this, I shouldn't get an error. So let's see what happens when I head to terminal and I run this. So when I run it, there's no problem. Let me quickly add a space before my is and rerun this. And this time I'm getting Robert is in index 1, John is in index 2. So I'm getting what name is being stored at each of those index positions. Now I'm going to use loops with logic. I will create a list that I'm going to call ages, and I'm going to store various age values in it. So I'm going to store values like 15, 26, 18, 44, 98, and 52. So what I want to do here, I want to find out whether a person is an adult or not using for loops. So I'm going to go back. If you remember, I made a logic video earlier and I tried to investigate this in that video. So I'm going to go back to that code and copy that, and then I'm going to copy it onto my today's code. So you can also access this code using GitHub, where I constantly update all the codes that I use for my videos. So once I do that, then I'm going to create a for loop for age and ages, and these if statements and else if statements are going to be within my for loop. I'm going to insert that logic within the for loop, and then I want to run this and see what exactly happens when I run this. When I run this code, I get that the first person is a kid, 15-year-old, yes. The second person is an adult, but not a teen, 26-year-old. And I'm going to just quickly add that comma, and then I'll continue. So for the third person, the person is an adult and a teen, yep, 18-year-old. The next one, the person is an adult, but not a teen, the 44-year-old. The next one is the person is a senior, which is the 98-year-old. The last one is the person is an adult, but not a teen, the 52-year-old. So this is how I use this. Seems to work really well, and this is how you can use logic and loops to find out whether someone's an adult or not, and you can expand on this list further. So lists are designed to be used with loops, and loops tend to help a lot with logic. So the first thing you want to do if you want to develop your Python skills further is to develop a logic. How do I do this problem? What method could I use to solve this problem? Then you got to think about how you can use loops to solve a problem. And that can be a really good methodology for you to get better with your skills. So with that thought, I'm going to sign out for today, and I hope you subscribe and like this video.